Hello from the Travel Tracker. We are happy that you are interested in the Travel Tracker, and we are glad to share our Sandbox site with you. This Sandbox site gives you access in multiple roles in the district. You will be able to experience the Travel Tracker as a requester, entering a trip request. This could be the teacher or the coach, or perhaps a staff person that's designated to submit trip requests in your district. You will be able to experience the Travel Tracker as a designated approver, approving the trip request. Approvers can be location level, maybe principals, bookkeepers, or central office, maybe the finance person or a director of one of the curriculum areas. You can be a vehicle owner and assign a vehicle and a driver to a trip. You will also be able to have the experience of a bookkeeper processing an invoice. And also, of course, as a transportation manager, having full access and authority in the system. The request form itself is customizable for your district. Many of the fields on the request form can be hidden for your district, and also up to 10 additional fields can be added. Many of the labels and pop-up messages are also customizable. So let's get started. To open the Travel Tracker Sandbox, simply click on the link that's in the instructions. You're going to log in first as that requester, the teacher, the coach, or maybe a staff person that's been designated to submit trip requests. This person has only the authority to submit requests. So sign in using the sandappgteach1@gmail.com login and enter in the password that's given in the instructions and click sign in. And so as the requester, we would refer to this as the end user. We have only two tabs, the main tab and the calendar tab. It's from the main tab that trip requests are submitted. All users will have the main tab. All users will be able to submit trip requests. The login determines the authority of each user, and that level of authority determines how many tabs that user has. So notice when I log in as the requester, I do have by default a view of all the trip requests that I have already submitted, so I can see the status of those requests, whether they're approved or not. I can see whose approval I'm waiting on, if they are still pending approval. I can access those trip requests simply by clicking anywhere on the trip information and open up the trip request form. As long as it's still pending the first approver, I can make changes to my trip request, but once it's approved, I can't make changes. I don't have the authority to do that. Now, in order to submit a trip request, your requester is going to come up to the option Submit a Request and click on that, and this will open up the request form for them. Notice that the request form itself will unfold as we answer certain questions. The first thing that you'll do is decide, well, what type of trip am I taking? Am I traveling just staff or with no students, or am I traveling with students? If I'm traveling with students, then I have an option to pick a trip type. There are 3 different types of trips. Only 2 were listed in the Sandbox. An athletic trip, this would be your team sports, and then a field trip, and these would be more curriculum based. And the difference in these forms is the athletic trip is a little more abbreviated version of the field trip request. Field trip requests are going to be the wider scope of information that is gathered. That may be the one that you'd like to start with as you're exploring the Travel Tracker. If you decided that you would like to use Travel Tracker to request vehicles for staff only travel, you can use that option and create a staff request. So experiment around with the different types of trip requests. Once you are getting started, you'll notice that the form is going to open up as we answer different questions and choose different options. So after you've selected the type of trip, then it's going to ask you to come in and fill out the trip leave and return date and time. And so you'll fill out that information simply by clicking on the calendars and the clocks. The information will fill in, and then more of the form opens up as we answer certain questions. So you can work your way through choosing your school. We have an example of high school, a middle school, and an elementary school that can be selected as you are working your way through the form. There's questions for the school nurses. You'll also see questions for child nutrition. Destinations are loaded into a table that can be selected. They can pick their destinations. Notice you can add stops on the way and stops on the return. Be sure to experiment with that. Find out your round trip miles as well as printable driving directions for the drivers. So all of that's right here at your fingertips. So as you work your way through, you can choose funding sources and see how that works. If there's a funding source that's paying for the trip, and indicate that. Lots of different options here that you can fill in. Fill in the contact information, teacher and emergency contact, grade level, educational objectives, passenger count. You'll be able to indicate if you are going to be using vehicles from transportation, and you'll be able to see how that works. Choosing the type of vehicle that you're going to need to be reserving and how many you think you might need. There's a area that you can indicate special travel needs. So all of this is there for your experience. Once you have filled out all of the required fields, and you will have to fill out everything that's required, you'll scroll all the way to the bottom and notice that there is a trip estimator that will, if you click this, it will expand it and give you an idea of how we can provide an estimated cost of the trip. You'll have to accept responsibility for the trip and then save and close it. The request form will then be added into your list and will be available then for the approver. An email will be generated and sent to the first approver of the trip, and they will be able then to access this particular trip request. Now, I will mention that the request form is not immediately available to the approvers. And so sometimes it can take just a few minutes for that request to be visible. So if you wanted to kind of go through this experience quickly, I'm going to show you a little bit of a shortcut on how you can push this request through so that you can see how the approver experience works. So let's go ahead and do that very quickly. Of course, this would not be a part of the regular process. It would be, this is just for your experience in the Sandbox. So once you've filled in the trip request, save and close it, you'll be assigned a trip number, and then the requester at that point would just kind of wait for notification that their request has been approved. So let me show you how to push this request through quickly so that the approver can see it. In order to push this request through, we do need to log in as a transportation administrator. We'll sign in now as transportation with full authority. And so when you want to try to push that request through so you don't have to wait on it to show up, go to your trip request tab here in the middle. And then over on the left, you're going to see an option of a trip inquiry. And so we're going to click on the trip inquiry. And then find the button here near the top that says Refresh Index on Database. If you will click that, this is just going to push anything out there to the front so that you can view that now and those requests as the approver. So once you've refreshed your index, let's just log back out. Now we're going to experience the travel tracker as an approver. So if you will follow through with your instruction guide here. We're going to log in now as a principal. So now we're logged in as that approver, and there can be many levels of approvers. Many approvers can be involved. We've got a lot of flexibility with how we set up your approvers. Notice when I log in as the approver, it defaults me to my tab, Trip Approval, and I see any requests that are waiting on my approval. So as I view the different requests here, I can look through them and see the ones that are waiting on my approval. I can see some summary information about each of the trip requests. To approve a trip, we simply will click anywhere on the trip information to open the request. As the approver, of course, I'm going to want to review the information very carefully. Notice that all of the fields are editable for me, so I can make changes if I need to this particular request. I'm going to look for the section near the bottom of the form. It's got a blue background for the approval, and notice that I can make comments here about this particular request. I have an approved and a denied button. I also can send an email to the requester or to someone else in the district regarding this particular trip. Lots and lots of flexibility for the approver. In order to approve a trip, of course, I'm just going to click the approved button. It's going to put my electronic signature and date and time on the request, and then I just simply save and close this. Now, if there were any other approvers after me, then they would be notified in an email that it's their turn to approve that trip. And so as the approver, I'm just going to work my way through the different requests, deciding if they can be approved or if they need to be have more information provided before I can approve it. I can email, and of course perhaps I would have to deny this trip if this trip cannot go, is when I would deny that trip. So that's the experience of the approver. Let me just mention at this point that you will see embedded training videos on a lot of the different areas. Be sure to watch those, take a look, and learn a little bit more about that level and that area of the travel tracker. Now we have approved the trip. It's time to assign a vehicle and a driver. So our next experience is going to be of what we would call the vehicle owner. So let's log in as the owner. So now we have logged in as the vehicle owner. This is the individual in the district who's been designated with the authority to assign a vehicle, perhaps a driver, to a trip. These owners could be in your schools, maybe the athletic director or the assistant principal perhaps has that responsibility. It could be perhaps your district is divided up into zones or areas, and you have dispatchers that are responsible for multiple schools and assigning trips, assigning drivers to trips and vehicles to trips. Maybe transportation handles everything. And so you would be considered the owner of all the vehicles, and you make all the assignments. So the travel tracker has the flexibility to manage any scenario as far as your owners go. The owners tab is the working tab for this purpose. When you log in, and if you are the owner of a trip, you are going to be responsible for signing the vehicle and the driver to the trip. When you log in, you're going to see this owners tab, and it's going to default you to requests that are approved and ready for that vehicle and perhaps driver assignment. And so you will see a list of trips that are ready. They're approved and they are ready for the vehicle to be assigned. You do have summary information here about each of your trips. In order to make the assignment, you'll click to open the request. So let's take a look at this high school trip that's asking for an activity bus for an athletic trip. So we're going to click and open the form. And even as the owner, I can notice that I have some editing, and I can make changes if I need to the trip leave and return time, there's some areas that I don't have the authority to make changes to. I can change when the vehicle is being picked up and returned. I can see the type of vehicle. I can read if there were any special travel needs requested and try to meet those needs. In order to assign the vehicle and the driver, perhaps the driver, I'm going to come down here to the reserve vehicles section here. I'm going to click on my Find Available Vehicles button, and this is going to bring up a list of vehicles that are available during this particular date and time that meet the needs of the request. In other words, the type of vehicle and whether or not a wheelchair lift is needed. So I can see this information here kind of summarized, and then I can see a list of vehicles that are available during this particular date and time. The travel tracker will not allow me to double book a vehicle. So if it's not already scheduled for a trip during this date and time, it's not going to show up in my list. In order to select a vehicle, I'm just going to simply click on the little star beside the vehicle that I'm wanting to assign and reserve that vehicle for this particular trip. Now notice that the request form has added a section called Current Assignments for the trip, and I can see that vehicle has been assigned. If you would like to use the driver assignment piece, you can assign drivers this way. You can just enter in your drivers here in the driver form. There's also a feature that we could turn on for you that would allow you to assign the driver along with the vehicle, maybe their regular route vehicle. And you can also assign drivers by availability so that you can't double book a driver, as well as you could not double book a vehicle. So you can pick your driver in. Once the assignment has been made, notice that you have buttons that you can click to print the driver trip ticket, and this is basically the document that you provide the driver with the trip information that they can then return back with their mileage, hours perhaps, if you collect that information. We also have a button you can click to print the trip ticket and those driving directions that we looked at earlier. The trip ticket would be accessed here. There's also other places you can access the trip ticket. Here's an example of what the trip ticket looks like, and we'll take a look at that. This is an example of a trip ticket. The trip ticket is customizable for your district. It does include some information, the vehicle information, the date and time of the trip, driver information, requester information, emergency contact, where the trip is originating, where it's going to, with an address. There is a place in the form that will be included that your drivers can indicate times and mileage if necessary. Other information is included for this driver, as well as an area they can sign and turn this back in. So the trip ticket is quickly available for any of the trips that you could print these off and pass those on to your drivers. Now, once you've assigned your vehicle and your driver, as the owner, you would just simply save and close that. We can turn on notifications to let the drivers know if you would like to give the driver's email address and let them be notified that they have a trip and when that trip is. So as the owner now, I'm just going to continue to work through my list here of trips that are approved and ready for vehicle assignment. Notice that different types of vehicles can be requested if that meets the needs of your district. Now it's time to take a look at the experience of a bookkeeper or secretary at the school if they are going to be reimbursing for the cost of this trip. So we're going to log in next as a bookkeeper or secretary. So now the trip has occurred and transportation has taken care of creating the invoice and determining the cost of the trip and the reimbursement for that trip, and the invoice has been approved for payment and now is available to be accessed by someone in school finance, the school secretary or the school bookkeeper, who is has the authority to view invoices and make payments. So we've logged in now as that school secretary or school bookkeeper. Notice that I have my own tab here, and it defaults me to pending payment. So I have visibility of invoices that have been approved for payment and are ready for me to write a check or to do a budget transfer. So as a school bookkeeper, I can see the trip information, the summary, as well as costing information here. I can see accounts, budget codes, funding sources. All that information is available to me. The process and procedures for school bookkeepers can be varied across districts, and we know this. So the process for the bookkeepers is very flexible with a travel tracker. Whatever your process is, more than likely we can manage it. A common process may be that the bookkeeper is going to write a check. They can simply mark that they have sent their check by putting a check mark in the box beside the word sent. They would be able to determine the cost of those particular trips that they are paying with the particular check. They can put in a check number if they know it, and simply confirm those changes and change the status then of those invoices to payment sent. At that point, depending again on your district's process, maybe someone in finance receives the check, enters it into your own accounting software, can come back into the travel tracker and mark those paid. Maybe there's budget transfers being done. Perhaps the bookkeeper is not writing checks, but is still going to indicate that they acknowledge that that budget transfer is being done by marking the sent box. If needed, they can even just put words into the check number, a PO number, so it completely flexible here, and then they can confirm changes if they're doing budget transfers and they're going to keep up with their own budgets at the school. Maybe they're still letting finance know that, yes, I know you're going to move money and do some budget transfers there, your own journal entries. So whatever your process may be, that's kind of the way it would look for your school finance folks. Now, let's take a look at the Sandbox from a transportation viewpoint. So I'm going to log out and let's log back in as transportation. So this is the view as a transportation administrator, full authority in the system, full access to all of the tabs, full visibility, global management of the system. The transportation administrator has the main tab and can submit trip requests. The configuration and setup tables tabs are admin tabs where they can set up the travel tracker rules. They can set up the tables, putting in locations, approvers, funding sources, drivers, vehicles, common destinations. The trip approval tab is just a view for them as what approvers would see. The owners tab, again, is a working tab if they are assigning vehicles. Trip request and assignments tab, these are both admin tabs that give global information about all trip requests and all assignments in the district. They don't have to narrow down by school, but they can see everything. Of course, they see all of the finance tabs, the invoices tab. There is a calendar tab that shows all the calendars in the all three calendars, a trip calendar, a vehicle calendar, and a driver calendar. The reports tab is a way that transportation administrators can access an export of all of the information for Travel Tracker. Support services is basically just a tab that would be accessed from your school nurses or your child nutrition folks. So that would be a view of their experience. I do want to mention we jumped from the vehicle being assigned to school finance and the invoices being worked on. So we missed the step here of, well, what happens with those invoices. So I do want to just touch on that briefly. Once a trip has occurred, the trip ticket is turned back in from the driver with perhaps their mileage and their hours on it, depending on how you reimburse for trips. But if you do reimburse for the cost of the trips, then you as a transportation administrator would work in the Invoices tab. The Invoices tab is just going to hold all of the invoices, all of the assignments until those trips have occurred. And once those trip tickets are turned in from your drivers, then you would come into your Invoices tab and you would fill in those details. So you can see here is an invoice that we're going to just open up and put in that information here before we send it down to the schools. So I'm going to click on the trip number here to open the invoice itself. And there we can see now a little embedded video to giving you some instructions if you would need that, but the invoice is very easy to work with. We're going to simply scroll down to the ending vehicle use section, and we can see that driver was assigned, and then we're just simply put in the number of hours that particular driver drove for this particular trip. Notice we can accommodate up to 3 different rates. Then we can put in mileage. The estimated miles are already in the invoice. This is coming from the Google Maps interface in the request, but you can override those if you like to capture the actual beginning and ending odometer readings. So you can override the estimate or you can bill on the estimate, either way. And then we would just simply compute our totals here to come up with our driver cost, our mileage cost. We do have other sections on the invoice that make our invoice very, very flexible. If you have other fees that you charge or other ways that you charge for trips, we can accommodate that. The total cost would be viewed here, and if that is correct, then transportation is going to change the invoice status from pending to approved for payment, and then they will save and close this. What that does then is make this particular invoice available and accessible to the school bookkeeper, that they can then write checks or do budget transfers like we looked at just a few moments ago. So that kind of fills in that step of how did that bookkeeper get that invoice, and that is how they do. They get it from transportation. Let me just briefly introduce you to the tabs that you have as a transportation administrator. One tab that is very important is the calendar tab, and this tab does contain 3 district-wide calendars. The vehicle calendar and the driver calendar contain information about the vehicles and the drivers that are assigned each day. The trip calendar is a district-wide calendar that's visible to all of your users, with some exceptions if you want to make those. We do have a lot of flexibility in who has the authority to see any of these calendars, but they can view on the calendar and see any trips that are scheduled for each day of the month. In the each of the calendars does have an embedded video if you would care to look at that. Your configuration and setup tables tabs give you lots of customizing ability of the travel tracker. Your setup tables is where you will be able to view all of the schools that are in your district, as well as how you would set up the authority at those schools. It does give you tables for your common destinations, for your drivers. So for example, if you wanted to find your driver information here, you could do that in your driver setup table, and it's going to your driver table and your vehicle table are all set up so that it makes it very easy to manage them and access them, adding drivers and making notes about drivers. You can put in email addresses, phone numbers, lots and lots of things. You can put in hire dates to establish seniority if you assign drivers based on seniority. So lots of different information here. Again, your vehicles. We also have a table for funding sources, account codes that are all accessible from the request form if you choose to have those set up. The reports tab is a way, as I mentioned, that you can export all of the details um, of your travel tracker, all of the trips, all of the assignments into a spreadsheet. It just gives some phenomenal reporting for you to find out just as much as you need to, almost unlimited information from the travel tracker. There is a nice little embedded video here as well that you might like to look at to give you an idea of some of the different things that you can do with the reports. And finally, I want to point out that we have superb support and training opportunities for all of your users. We have 24/7 support. We have live chat available. They can create support tickets if it's after hours. And we also have training videos and quick reference guides available. So the training videos are just phenomenal. You and all of your users can access these training videos at any time and watch those to learn more about how to do something in the travel tracker, to learn more about that particular user's role and how they can do their job in the travel tracker. So hopefully you will enjoy the Sandbox and the experiences that you can have and all the different roles in the travel tracker. Thank you very much.